In life, everyone must face moments of sorrow, when trust is betrayed, when our expectations are shattered. The feeling of betrayal is akin to a sharp blade, cutting through the threads of affection and leaving deep scars in the soul. During such times, we often ask ourselves, why is this happening to me? Why would someone I trusted cause me such harm? In these moments of suffering, the teachings of Buddhism and Zen offer an entirely different perspective. Instead of seeing pain as an enemy to be defeated, these teachings encourage us to view it as an opportunity to understand ourselves. Suffering, in the light of the Buddha's teachings, is like a mirror reflecting the attachments, expectations, and illusions that we create in our minds. The Buddha once taught that all suffering arises from attachment to things that are unreal and impermanent. When we place our trust in a relationship or in someone, we often impose expectations upon them. We want them to act in a way that we believe is right. When those expectations are shattered, we feel betrayed. But in truth, it is these very expectations that are the source of our suffering. In Zen, there is a famous saying, "Nothing is ours, everything is borrowed." When we understand this, we realize that every relationship, every emotion, and even our very selves are transient. We cannot control the actions of others, nor can we predict the future. The only thing we can do is accept the impermanence of life and learn to let go of unnecessary expectations. Betrayal, when viewed from this perspective, is no longer something monstrous. It is simply a part of life, a phase of the journey that each person must go through in order to grow. When we face betrayal with the mindset of a practitioner, we see it as an opportunity to cultivate compassion and understanding. We learn to view others not with judgment, but with empathy. We realize that the one who betrays us is also a victim of their own delusions and suffering. The Buddha once said, "One who does not show compassion for others does not understand their own suffering." When we are betrayed, instead of drowning in resentment, let us look deep within ourselves to see that this resentment only adds to our suffering. Let us practice letting go, so that our minds may be lighter and our hearts at peace. Betrayal, no matter how painful, is a part of the spiritual practice. It teaches us the lesson of impermanence, of compassion, and of forgiveness. It reminds us that life is a series of challenges, and each challenge is an opportunity for us to learn and grow. When we understand this, we will no longer fear betrayal, but will accept it as an inevitable part of life. We will learn to live without attachment, without expectation, and without resentment. We will live with compassion and understanding, so that each passing day becomes one of peace and happiness. In life, when we are hurt, we often tend to place the blame on others. We believe that our pain is caused by the wrongdoings of others. However, if we look deeply into the nature of these actions, we will realize that all suffering originates from the three fundamental roots that the Buddha taught: ignorance, greed, and anger. The story of a wise hermit and a traveler will help us better understand these three roots and how they lead to suffering. In Buddhism, ignorance is seen as the root of all suffering. It is the state of lacking understanding, not perceiving the true nature of life and reality. The hermit explains that ignorance is like a thick fog that obscures clarity, making it impossible for a person to see the right path and leading them into wrong actions. Ignorance is not simply the lack of ordinary knowledge, but also blindness to the fundamental truths of life, such as impermanence, suffering, and non-self. People often live under the illusion that things are permanent, that there is a fixed self, and that happiness can be attained through possession and control. It is these illusions that lead them into thoughtless actions that harm not only themselves but others as well. The hermit compares ignorance to a fog, which obstructs a person's vision. Without clear sight, they are easily misled and fall into the traps of desire, anger, and greed. They do not intentionally harm others, but because they do not understand themselves and the world around them, they act blindly, resulting in painful consequences. Ignorance is the root cause of much of the suffering in life. When people do not understand the true nature of things, they are easily swept up in negative emotions like fear, anxiety, and disappointment. They lose the ability to live mindfully, and as a result, their decisions and actions often bring suffering to both themselves and others. The hermit recounts stories from Buddhist scriptures to illustrate the consequences of ignorance. One of the most notable stories is about a king who, due to his lack of understanding, made wrong decisions that led to the downfall of his entire kingdom. Those influenced by ignorance often fail to see the consequences of their actions until it is too late. According to Buddhist teachings, ignorance is the primary cause of rebirth and samsara. Because people fail to realize the impermanent nature of life, they cling to both life and death, leading to the unending cycle of birth and death. Only when one awakens and transcends ignorance can they end the cycle of samsara and attain liberation. The hermit teaches that to escape the cycle of samsara, one must practice mindfulness and wisdom. Mindfulness helps individuals live with awareness, clearly perceiving what is happening in the present moment, while wisdom allows them to understand the nature of impermanence and non-self. When one possesses both mindfulness and wisdom, they can dispel the fog of ignorance and see the path to liberation. The hermit advises that in order to transcend ignorance, one must practice according to the Noble Eightfold Path, the Eightfold Path leading to enlightenment. The Noble Eightfold Path includes right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. This is the path that helps individuals develop wisdom, compassion, and ultimately liberate themselves from ignorance. Right view, or correct understanding, is the first step on the path to liberation. It enables individuals to recognize the impermanent nature of life and frees them from being deceived by illusions. Right intention, or right thought, helps them eliminate negative thoughts and direct their minds toward virtuous actions. Greed, according to the hermit, is one of the three toxic roots that lead individuals into the whirlpool of suffering. It is likened to a bottomless well, where no matter how much one tries, it can never be filled. Greed not only harms others but also causes the one harboring it to live in insecurity and deprivation. Greed is not merely the desire for material things such as money, fame, or power. It also encompasses the incessant yearning for love, recognition, and a sense of safety. The nature of greed is an insatiable dissatisfaction with what one already has, always craving for more. Those driven by greed often do not realize that it is this very desire that causes them suffering. The hermit explains that greed is like a bottomless bag, no matter how much is put in, it cannot be filled. Each time something is attained, the person desires more, as if they will never feel enough. This leads to a life in a constant state of lack and discontent, even when they may have so much already. The consequence of greed is enduring suffering, not only for the person consumed by it but also for those around them. When people are led by greed, they easily get lost in the pursuit of material goals, forgetting the true value of life. They may be willing to harm others and lose precious relationships simply to achieve what they desire. The hermit tells stories from Buddhist scriptures, in which kings, merchants, and even common people fall into tragic circumstances because of their greed. One typical story is of a wealthy merchant who, never satisfied with what he had, continuously sought more wealth and material goods. In the end, it was his greed that led him to loneliness and loss, as he had alienated his family and friends. Ignorance is the greatest darkness that one needs to overcome. However, By practicing and cultivating wisdom, a person can transcend this darkness and attain true freedom and happiness. The traveler bids farewell to the hermit with deep gratitude, carrying with him a resolution to practice and free himself from ignorance, seeking enlightenment in life. Another aspect that the hermit emphasizes is the connection between greed and a sense of insecurity. The greedy person often lives in fear of losing what they have. This constant yearning prevents them from feeling at peace, always worrying about the future and fearing what has not yet happened. This insecurity makes their life heavy and full of pressure. The hermit explains that when one is unaware of the limits of greed, they easily become caught in a cycle of insecurity and suffering. They seek safety in material things, but in reality, nothing in this world is permanent. True safety can only be found when one lets go of greed and lives with a peaceful mind. To escape the vortex of greed, the hermit advises that people need to cultivate the practice of contentment and compassion. Contentment, or being satisfied, helps individuals appreciate what they already have and avoid being swept away by relentless desire. When one is content, they will feel more peaceful and happy, not pressured by what they do not have. Compassion is also an important method to overcome greed. When a person lives with compassion, they care for others and are willing to share what they have. This sharing not only helps reduce greed but also brings happiness and connection in relationships. The hermit also reminds that greed cannot be eliminated immediately. It requires persistent practice and mindfulness in every thought and action. One must clearly recognize the impermanent nature of all things in life and learn to let go of what is unnecessary. The hermit concludes that greed is one of the deepest sources of suffering. But if one practices and lives with a mindful mind, they can overcome greed and find tranquility in life. After hearing the hermit's teachings, the traveler realized that it was greed that had caused him to live in insecurity and suffering. He resolved to practice letting go of greed and seek true peace within his heart. Anger, as the hermit explained, is one of the three poisons that causes the greatest suffering for humanity. It is likened to a fierce flame, ready to consume everything in its path. Anger not only destroys relationships and harms others, but it also ravages the soul of the one who harbors it. It is a powerful emotion that clouds the mind and leads individuals into a vicious cycle of hatred and suffering. Anger arises from negative emotions when one feels offended, unjustly treated, or when their expectations are unmet. In this state, one easily falls into wrath and resentment, often seeking revenge or attempting to harm others as a way to release these feelings. The hermit explains that anger is like a fire raging in the mind, burning away peace and wisdom. When anger arises, one loses the ability to think objectively and often acts on impulse, leading to negative consequences. Anger not only harms others but also damages the one who holds it, robbing them of serenity and happiness. The consequences of anger are severe, both personally and socially. Anger can shatter familial relationships, friendships, and even entire societies. Those led by anger often resort to violence, say words that hurt others, or engage in acts of revenge. Throughout history, many wars, conflicts, and tragedies have stemmed from the fire of anger. When individuals fail to control their rage, they are easily swept into cycles of violence and hatred, causing great harm to themselves and others. The hermit recounts stories from Buddhist scriptures, where anger led to heartbreaking tragedies. One example is the story of a king, who, after being insulted, became enraged and ordered the destruction of an entire village, causing death and suffering for many innocent people. After the anger subsided, the king realized his cruelty, but by then, it was too late to undo the harm. Anger clouds the intellect and makes one blind. When consumed by anger, a person loses the ability to see clearly and often acts impulsively. This blindness not only harms others but also harms oneself, causing the mind to become disturbed and filled with suffering. The hermit emphasizes that when individuals fail to control their anger, they are easily caught in the cycle of hatred and are unable to find peace in their hearts. They live in a constant state of tension, anxiety, and fear, always feeling threatened and unsafe. To break free from the cycle of anger, the hermit advises that one should cultivate compassion and forgiveness. Compassion opens the heart, allowing one to love and forgive others. When living with compassion, a person experiences peace and is no longer governed by anger. Forgiveness, or the act of letting go of resentment and hatred, is also essential. When one practices forgiveness, they no longer hold on to negative emotions and are able to forgive others with ease. Forgiveness helps release the burden of anger and brings peace to the soul. The hermit also emphasizes that, to overcome anger, one must practice meditation and mindfulness. Meditation calms the mind, bringing clarity and helping one to control their emotions, preventing anger from taking over. Mindfulness allows one to recognize negative emotions as they arise and transform them in a healthy manner. The hermit concludes that anger is a fire that burns everything, but if one practices and lives with compassion, they can extinguish that flame and find peace in their heart. After hearing the hermit's teachings, the traveler realized that it was anger that had caused him suffering and taken away his serenity. He resolved to practice letting go of anger and seek true peace in life. After gaining a deep understanding of the three roots of suffering: ignorance, greed, and anger, the traveler gradually realized that the betrayal they had experienced was not merely a personal act, but a manifestation of a greater cycle of suffering. This cycle did not only imprison the betrayer, but also held the betrayed within the whirlpool of pain. Therefore, the journey to seek freedom from suffering is not a journey of punishment or revenge, but a path towards understanding and liberation. The hermit had once taught that all suffering arises from the three fundamental roots: ignorance, greed, and anger. The betrayal that the traveler endured was no exception. At first, they felt like a victim of malicious intent, but upon deeper reflection, they realized that the betrayer was also trapped in these very roots of suffering. Ignorance leads people to act blindly, unaware of the consequences their actions may cause. Greed makes them yearn for things that do not truly belong to them, while anger blinds them and pushes them into cycles of violence and hatred. When the traveler understood this, their perspective on betrayal began to shift. Looking into the suffering of the betrayer, the traveler realized that they, too, were victims of the same sources of suffering. This was not an excuse for the betrayer's actions, but a profound understanding of human nature and the traps they often fall into. This understanding paved the way for compassion and forgiveness. Forgiveness is not only an act of freeing another from resentment, but also a way to liberate oneself from the burden of hatred. The traveler understood that holding on to anger not only harmed the betrayer but also kept them bound in suffering. The journey to freedom is not a straight path, but one filled with challenges and difficulties. To achieve liberation, the traveler must learn to let go of negative emotions and cultivate compassion. This is not easy, for deep wounds often leave marks on the soul, but it is the only way to reach true peace and freedom. Along this journey, the traveler learned the practice of meditation to calm the mind and recognize negative emotions when they arise. They practiced mindfulness to keep their mind awake and not be swept away by negative thoughts. Each step along the way became an opportunity to practice compassion, forgiveness, and joy in letting go, bringing them ever closer to freedom. As the traveler continued their path, they gradually realized that true freedom does not lie in avoiding suffering, but in learning how to face and transcend it. Liberation is not a state, it is a process of cultivation and transformation of the mind. The traveler understood that within each person lies the potential to transform suffering into peace, and that freedom is not a destination but an ongoing journey. With every step along this path, they gained a deeper understanding of the nature of life, the sources of suffering, and how to overcome them. The journey to freedom is long and full of challenges, but it is the only path that leads to true peace and happiness. After understanding the three roots of suffering, the traveler found freedom for themselves through forgiveness and letting go. They realized that freedom does not come from avoiding or controlling others, but from understanding oneself and living in peace and compassion. The lessons from this journey are not only for the traveler but also serve as valuable teachings for all of us who seek peace and happiness in life. By recognizing and transforming the roots of suffering, we can find true freedom and live a meaningful and peaceful life. The traveler returned to meet the hermit, their heart lighter and their mind clearer. This encounter was not merely a simple conversation, but a significant turning point in their spiritual journey. With deep gratitude, the traveler thanked the hermit for helping them gain a clearer understanding of the nature of suffering and its profound origins. The sense of relief they felt did not come from avoiding suffering, but from understanding and accepting the impermanent nature of life. Throughout their journey, the traveler had experienced many emotional ups and downs, from suffering and resentment to understanding and compassion. The lightness in their soul upon returning to the hermit was the result of a profound inner transformation. They were no longer haunted by past wounds, but instead, they viewed them as valuable lessons. The hermit had once taught that suffering is not something that can be erased or avoided, but is an inevitable part of life. Through deep understanding of the nature of suffering, the traveler had learned to accept and transcend it. This not only brought peace to their soul but also gave them a deeper insight into themselves and the world around them. The clarity of mind that the traveler felt was the result of meditation and deep contemplation. By facing and overcoming difficulties, they had attained a state of mind that was calm and clear. This clarity was not a temporary state, but a profound awareness of the nature of life. The traveler realized that it was this awareness that helped them overcome difficulties and suffering. This wisdom not only allowed them to see more clearly into themselves and life, but also helped them face future challenges with calmness and confidence. The gratitude the traveler felt for the hermit was not just an expression of respect, but also an acknowledgement of the important role that guidance and direction play in the spiritual journey. The traveler recognized that the lessons they received from the hermit were not just theoretical knowledge, but practical teachings that could be applied in daily life. This gratitude also reflected the traveler's humility and reverence. They understood that the spiritual journey is not a solitary one, but one that involves support and guidance from those who have walked the path before. Thanks to the hermit's guidance, they had found the right path and attained peace in their soul. The traveler realized that suffering is an unavoidable part of life, but how one faces it determines one's freedom. The freedom they sought was not freedom from suffering, but freedom from the bondage of the mind and negative emotions. They understood that freedom is not a fixed state, but a continuous process of cultivation and transformation. By facing suffering and learning to overcome it, they had attained true freedom, the freedom of the soul and mind. The meeting with the hermit was not just the end of one journey, but the beginning of a new one. The traveler realized that the spiritual journey has no end, but is a continuous process of learning and growth. They understood that each step on this path is an opportunity to learn and grow. Each challenge and difficulty they encounter is a valuable lesson that helps them mature and become stronger. The story of the traveler is not just the story of an individual, but a lesson for all of us. We all must face difficulties and suffering in life, but how we face them will determine our freedom and happiness. Through this story, we learn that true freedom is not freedom from suffering, but freedom from the bondage of the mind and negative emotions. True freedom is freedom in the soul and mind, and to achieve it, we must learn how to face and transcend the difficulties and suffering in life.